All right. Welcome, everybody, to the May 9th AWX Community Meeting. The agenda for today, Hao is going to present the Spud Award, and then we have some upcoming work items presented by Seth and Tanga, Railrod, and myself. And then Alan is going to talk about a proposed idea for community integration testing. Jake is going to have an announcement to make. We will give thanks to our new contributors, and then any remaining time will be open for general discussion. With that, I'll turn it over to Hao for the Spud Award.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. So I want to extend our thanks to Tanga. He's been a long-time contributor to AWX, and recently, well, you will see it in today's agenda. We will be talking about him a lot. Seems to be a man of many talents, able to handle HA Postgres database with a bunch of open source projects cobbled together. That's really impressive. I have to rely on Crunchy. And also, besides being able to do that, he apparently also knows how to contribute to the UI as well. That is really impressive. Tanga, we extend our most sincere thanks to you, and thank you for engaging with us and helping people in the community and helping us push forward with our common goals. Thank you very much. Put a round of applause. And please send Mr. Gondolo your shipping information. He will get you sorted with one of our spuds. All right. Yeah.
Excellent.
Tanga, do you want to stand up and say a couple words?
Thank you. I appreciate. When we receive the spud, I will send you and also publish on Instagram or something like this. Okay. And
awesome.
thank you. It's a pleasure work on this project in terms of support. And yes, I think we continue to contribute without issue in the future. Thank you.
All right. So no need to mute yourself, because up next is you and Mr. Seth to talk about the work you guys have been doing with hop nodes.
Yeah, I can talk about this. So I'm leading up the feature for the next upcoming releases of AWX. That's going to be adding hop node support to the deployment. This will allow you to add remote instances that can sit between your control plane and your execution plane as a way of basically giving users better flexibility in terms of how the nodes are connected across the automation mesh. So the work is ongoing. We have a feature branch that you can already pull down and start to play with. It's on the main AWX repo. So for those who want to contribute and get more involved, the branch is called feature_hop nodes on AWX. And it's in a pretty stable state right now, so it shouldn't be it should be usable, and you can kind of play around with it. Would it be helpful to give like a little 1 minute kind of quick demo of it, or what would be the best way to talk about it? Or do we just want to kind of mention that?
Seth, so yeah, I think a demo will definitely be helpful, and maybe like pull up like Excalibur to show topology with Hopno and why Hopno may be interesting.
Yeah, sure. Let me just do something real quick. I'll take over the screen share. One moment. Okay, so let me at least quickly kind of like show what the feature looks like in the UI. And this is actually something that Tonga has contributed to with the PR that was mentioned earlier. So essentially what you can do is you can go to the instances page, and we are now able to add a new type of instance. So before you were only able to add an execution node, but now we have this ability to add a hop node. So let's say, for instance, I want to add a hop node. I'll call it hop4. So you just give it a hop node name, and this will actually be a resolvable DNS name. So this might be something that looks more like a DNS name. And so let's go ahead and change the instance type to hop. And we'll have the other part of this feature that Tonga enabled was this checkbox that says connect to control planes, which basically tells AWX that this is going to be an instance that the control plane is directly connected to. So let's save this. And if I go to the topology view, there's a few instances I had here before, so you can kind of ignore them. But this here is our control node. And you can see that we now have a link to this new node that we have called hop4. And so what this allows us to do then is use this hop node to connect to additional either hop nodes or execution nodes. So just for demonstration purposes, I will now link this hop node to an additional execution node. So let's go back to our instances. And I can do it two ways. So one way I can do it is just add an execution node. So I'll just call it exe I'll just put execution node, type execution. And then what you can do is you can hit this, you can hit peers, and I can tell it to peer to any of these hop nodes. So I just created hop node 4, so I'm going to click that one. And also, I don't want this execution node to be connected to the control plane directly, so I'm going to uncheck mark this. I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to give it a legal name. So now if we go back to the topology view, we can see our control node connected to hop node 4, and the execution node is peered inbound to hop node 4. So these are in an installed state. So when you add the instances, it just sort of sets up the basic connectivity, intended connectivity in the API and the database. But it doesn't automatically provision these instances. So as before, in the same way you would set up an execution node, you would still click here, you would click the install bundle, and you would provision that running the Ansible playbook that we have included in the bundle. Same thing for the hop nodes. These basically the same. We have an install bundle that you can click. And you can do other things. So like when you go to the instance, if you already have an instance connected, there is now a peers tab here. This is also something that Tonga added. So you can click peers, and we can associate additional peers that didn't have a link before. So you can create the instances in one step. And then later on, if you say, oh, actually, I wanted hop4 to be connected to hop3, then you can go in and click save. So we're going to have this nice UI management of connectivity of different hop nodes and instances and execution nodes right in the UI. And of course, this is all interacting with the API, so you'll be able to do it through the API and that sort of thing. So if we go to topology view, we now see that the hop node 4 is connected outbound to hop node 3. So the arrows here do have some sort of real world implication. So the arrows will indicate which of the nodes are expected to have TCP listeners involved. So for example, hop node 4 is expected to have a receptor TCP listener listening on a port, and execution nodes will be yielding outbound connections to the hop node 4. And that was one of the main motivations for this feature, was that users want to be able to set up remote connections but the current limitation in the current version of AWX is that the control plane must connect outbound to an execution node, which means that the execution node would have had to have a port open and listening on the public internet, which is in some network conditions is not going to be allowed or possible. So with some clever configuration of hop nodes and execution nodes, you can have your execution nodes maybe behind some VPN that connect into a hop node that then peers into a control plane. So it's going to give users hopefully some good flexibility in how they configure the mesh. That's what I want to say about that. If Tonga wants to add any other additional things about the work that he did with the UI, go ahead and jump in. But was there a question also? I thought I heard something.
Sean, I don't have a question.
I was going back and forth on it, but at least for hop nodes, which are directly peered to controller nodes, is the reason why there isn't a built-in job template to then like take a machine credential and then deploy to that hop node once it's been added in here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that's something that we're going to look into as like a secondary step. It probably won't make it into the first round because there could be some complications with that. But I think for certain hop nodes that you set up or execution nodes, even I
understand. It was more of, if you have the download, you can always do the download and do it directly on the node via Sneakernet. But for like directly connected ones, it's nice to be able to, like, okay, we've added it and you can make it a process or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's possible. And I would really like to implement something like that. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to add to this feature and do that exact thing, which would basically, when you add the peer, maybe there's a button here that you manually click, or it just automatically does it to basically sort of run that playbook from the control plane node to the execution node if there's like proper credentials. And of course, if SSH is enabled on those nodes, which might not always be the case. So the install bundle gives us the greatest flexibility, and that's why we're going to have that for now. But certainly, that's a really good feature idea, and hopefully we can get to that at some point. Okay, I'm going to stop presenting, but if people have other questions, Tonga's the person to talk to. I'm the person to talk to on this. We would have loved more contributors and ideas coming in. Like I said, it's active work, so this is a good time to kind of jump in, learn about hop nodes if you have an interest. So if you have a use case for it, even if you don't want to develop for it, but you know that you would like to use this in a particular way, but this would be a good opportunity to say, I would like this to be as part of the features, any way we can squeeze it in. Oh, there's a question. Hi, David, what's up?
Yeah, I had a question about, so execution environments on the execution node still has to, like, you can't, it'd be nice if the control plane could pass the execution node that you're wanting, or execution environment to the execution node, because, a lot of times with mesh, right, the idea is to, it's an isolated environment, oftentimes the execution node. And so being able to pass the execution environment through the hop node to the execution node over the control plane, from the control plane, I think is really optimal and needed.
That is actually a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I think that would be, that is definitely feasible within the automation mesh. Like, we have the capabilities. There would certainly be a pretty big lift to implement that, but I can certainly see the desire for something like that, especially as you say, maybe these nodes don't have access to the internet, so you have to preload all the images in a different manner before setting them up, and then so it would be nice if we could sort of push additional information over. Yeah, as Gabe says, it could be a bandwidth thing we'd have to consider there. So yeah, this is I do agree, this would be a really nice idea. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, you have more to say about that, Hal? Or
No, I'm just a little excited about the idea, right? Like what David Dennison was saying. Like imagine if the execution node is on an edge environment where it's not feasible for us to like connect it to Artifactory or image registry, or eliminating the need of having to configure image registry, right? We won't be able to push the image by layers and in doing any optimized way, like what Gabe mentioned in chat. Bandwidth would definitely be a concern. Like it's essentially we're just SCP in the file over. Maybe we might be able to hack something together.
Cool. Any other thoughts on this topic before we move along?
What might be nice to do, and this is just like an interim thing, is we might have the ability to just use like a Scopio or something, right? And then install those as part of the receptor collection. That way you can say, okay, I want this execution node. I want this to be an execution node, and here are the pre-built images. And then if you have images of your own, you can give a list of those that also have installed locally, obviously, right? But that would be on the user to then make sure that those images were always up to date. Sorry, I know this wasn't about that, but it just seemed like ancillary.
How do you spell Scopio?
Skopeo, I think.
Yeah, it's in the installer of how to, like, the installer uses it to distribute images.
Yeah. It's just happened to be an interesting topic. We can look. We might be able to hack something together and take a look. Cool. Thank you very much, Seth, and thank you very much, Tonga, for the contribution. And special shout out to Kurokobo also. Before we deliver Hopno, he wrote an article on his blog about how to hack together Hopno in our previous release, and also he added a lot of bug fixes to the receptor collection, which we use to stand up Hopno and the execution node. Thank you very much, Kurokobo. Awesome community member. All right, let's move on to the next topic.
All right. Next topic is resilience improvement by Rick Elrod.
So before we start into how we ended up solving this problem, I wanted to provide a little bit of background on how we arrived at this problem. For those of you who's been watching and attending the community meeting, in our last community meeting, Tonga brought up the topic of DB failover, right? And problem that we are seeing in DB failover, and presented a solution for it. The solution itself didn't necessarily work out, but it did brought this very important topic to our attention. So our team went and stood up a RDS database and a Crunchy database to try out how do we react to, like, how do we do after a database failover, right? And the answer was quite shocking. Well, we kind of just hung. And Rick is going to go into a little bit more detail about how we ended up solving the problem. But again, thank you, Tonga, for bringing this topic to our attention, and also writing up a very, very detailed issue about like what you're observing. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So as Hal mentioned, we kind of got a group together internally. We were experimenting with Amazon RDS and how to handle a failover. So in RDS, you can, if people haven't used it before, you can contribute it to be highly available. And so if there's an issue, it will automatically fail over to another instance of RDS. And so the way that works, kind of, I think this is common throughout multiple cloud providers, but the way it works on RDS specifically is it will change a CNAME record and point you to the new database once it's ready and available. And so the way we tested this in our work group when we were trying to reproduce this issue was to manually trigger a failover from one RDS instance to another, and we found that basically a lot of our subsystems within AWX would just kind of hang and hold on to a connection to the old RDS instance, even though it was no longer online and available. And so pretty much everything locked up, and even when the new RDS instance became available, most of AWX didn't actually know about the new instance. It was still trying to talk to the old instance. So if you submitted a new job to AWX, it would wait in pending forever, or at least for a really long time. And this was kind of the issue that we were trying to solve. And so basically we got to thinking, I got to thinking, how do other programs solve this? If you are SSH'd into a server and that server goes away, eventually SSH times out and says, connection failed or whatnot. And so I got thinking about how that works, and obviously the answer is TCP keep alives. And that is generally a kernel level setting. And basically what we found is a lot of times that default is much slower than we would like for AWX. So really our solution here is a fairly simple solution, and that is to just change those keep alive settings in AWX. So those are connection parameters to Postgres, and basically we can set them to say, send out these keep alive packets more often, and if we don't actually get a response, then we can consider that connection dead and try to reconnect. And so it was a relatively simple solution, but it seems to work. And then if we notice the old connection gone, we reconnect, and we end up hitting the new RDS instance, and eventually the jobs that were in pending become not pending anymore, and things just start working again. So hopefully that's a decent summary. How do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so it's literally just a configuration change that we implemented through AWX Operator. We are currently testing this change right now to make sure that it doesn't cause any unintended consequences, but it seems to be working fine. So hopefully in the next AWX release, you should be able to fail over your HA database with no disruption. Again, thank you very much, Rick, for providing the solution, and thank you very much, Hanga, and for bringing this to our attention. I'm sure there are other community members that have brought this up too. Like sorry if I, miss didn't mention. But anyway, thank you. I think this is a huge improvement to our resiliency. All right.
Very cool. Any questions from the community around this topic? All right, moving on then. The next thing we wanted to talk about was Django migration status, and I'm going to give a very brief summary of this. The new version of long-term supported Django is out, version 4.2. We are currently on 3.2, I believe. And so we are working to upgrade Django and all required supported libraries up to the latest version so that we can use Django 4. It's been a little bit of a trip. We had a couple snags that we've been working through, but hopefully probably by the next release, we will definitely be on Django 4.2, and we may even do an interim release if we finish it up a little bit sooner. Any questions about the Django migration? All right, I'm going to turn it over to Alan then to talk about community integration tests.
I'll go ahead. I'll start by putting a link in the chat, which is really the main link for this. And if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and try to share the screen and take over. Hopefully it won't take too long particularly. I just thought that I would like to do a real demo along with it. So here I am. I'm on the branch that I'm using for it. And we store a lot of Docker Compose stuff in tools folder. So I've added this new integration testing folder, which I'll work out of. And then I'll bring up over here. Here's some tests out of this new test suite that's being proposed essentially. And I'm on my computer here. I'm not getting into the AWX container just now. The idea here is that we're going to run from outside of the container instead of inside of the container. And then I'll put in a trace just inside of the test. And I'll go ahead and get a test running. I'll probably try to make that a little bit bigger while it's in progress. And this is a test, again, proposed for, CI, proposed for putting in the GitHub checks in AWX. And you see what's going on here is that it's doing a poll in a startup fixture in order to start up the AWX devel image. You see echoed right here. So when you run Docker Compose anything, that's the image that it's using. And then in the tools directory, we already have some tooling to work with external images, like AWX is the example here. In this test, we have AWX kit that's installed and that's usable. So these tests are going to work through via AWX kit. And this operates as a full, effectively integration type test. So you can do things like v2.organizations.get, and then it'll show you, it'll do a request, like it's actually using the request library under the hood. And you can see there's nothing here because this is going to have to use a new database every time. So let's see if I can manage to bring it up. Yeah, there we go. So I actually don't want that. The UI doesn't always work in this. While this test is running, so this is in the middle of the test where I set that breakpoint. And you can see the image is running, and then it has the AWX devel image running. It has some old stuff too. It has AWX and TACX containers running at the same time. So when I go here, it's running AWX in this super duper minimal way without Postgres or Redis, which is awkward to be sure. And that might have to change at some time too, especially as other containers require their own like Postgres or something like that. So the really cool thing, something I really like about running tests this way is that once the test is done, I can go and dump all the logs from those containers. So these are the logs from a TACX container. And again, for the purpose of the test, within the PyTest fixtures, it started running the AWX devel and the TACX plus container, and then had them talk to each other and had them do something meaningful. And that is working relatively well right now. I think for what I have in mind, I'm perfectly content for this to just be something that tests SSO, external auth, as well as credential plugins, hopefully. So I'm a little hesitant to put it up too seriously until I have some kind of demo of credential plugins, because there might be some API limitations that I haven't actually thought about yet. But I just wanted to show how this is a test. It starts running functional servers and then has them interact together. And the beauty of this is that I really want to be able to tap into community images for other types of external integrations to get us kind of cheap, not, I don't want to say cheap testing, but like, you know, some stable testing that the other community members can interact with, because such a large fraction of the community contributions are dealing with some kind of plugins of this type. So I think that this could get us working a lot faster, giving people the ability to dive into those and mess with the test as they're doing development. So here's that pull request I linked. It's just on my fork for now. And again, like maybe I'll put it up there if we have some example of a credential plugin. Or I guess we'll have an example of like SSO and credential plugin. So here's an example of the check. You could potentially see this check when you put up a pull request. Right now it's triggered if it's given a particular label, but we could trigger it based on if you change certain paths, still not decided there. This step here where it builds the image is shared with all of the other checks. So this is just perfectly standard. That's going to happen in any check that runs. Here is where it runs the integration test. You see it's at 1 minute right now, which I think is pretty satisfying. So if we test maybe 10 different integrations, then hopefully it might take like 10 minutes, right? 15 minutes. That still wouldn't be too bad because these are really full integration tests, in my opinion. I think that wouldn't be unreasonable. This shouldn't run on every pull request. So again, this runs all of the tests for the TACX Plus that we were looking at, and you can see there's a little bit more heft in the server logs, and it shows particular behaviors from particular things that the test did there in the server logs, which I like to see. And I think people would like to see if they were working on tests and trying to contribute them. All right, I'm done with my little mini demo. Sean, what's up?
Oh, I was just going to comment, and maybe you already knew or did this, but I believe Galaxy NG currently has a thing where it stands up Keycloak. And so it might be beneficial to basically either piggyback or steal their templates or something of how they do it, so you aren't duplicating efforts.
Yeah, to be honest, I feel like the instructions for standing up those images tend to be like not that bad. Like in the example of TACX, it was as simple as you could possibly have made it. But you're right, we could go over there and then copy over essentially what amounts to the Docker run options, I think. And then that is really all that we need. You know, that you have some port that you talk to them on.
I just wanted to like throw it out there to at least put the idea.
Yeah, Keycloak, I think, is already in our Docker Compose. My intent here is that this whole thing is just copying existing stuff. There should be nothing really new except for the idea of putting it all together. Keycloak, John might correct me, but if you look in Tools, Docker Compose, there's all of these little widgets to add on additional containers in the Docker Compose development environment. And this, in the ideal, I think that this is just copying, like a direct copy of those options that we're already using in Docker Compose. So yeah, they might be using so they're using Keycloak and Galaxy NG. That makes sense. I think you can enable Keycloak, but I do think getting regular like testing in the checks for that would be really is like that piece that we're missing. We're not doing that right now.
Do you use Keycloak? And I would be a little bit concerned about nightlies, because if we just use some nightly image to introduce a new option or something, we might break an integration test versus using like a fixed version of some container.
Of the Keycloak image.
Yeah, so like when we set up the Keycloak image, we install a realm, and if Keycloak adds a parameter to a realm that we don't have turned on or off, the integration test could break. Any other questions from the community around these proposed integration tests?
I like them.
Yeah, I definitely think they're super cool and would be a really great way for doing feedback, especially on integrations that maybe like we as a team don't have a ton of experience with.
Well, one interesting question come to mind for me. Is there any way for these integration to like live outside of the AWX project. Like, imagine if, let's say, CyberArk, right, like infamous Joe G, is able to, like, if we can have external repo that says like AWX CyberArk test integration, right, and it's able to tone down our thing, stand up CyberArk thing next to it, and then test that integration, rather than having everything living in the AWX repo itself.
That, or it would be cool if there was a way that we could like override the container that was used in a test, so he could test like the next version of CyberArk with our tests or something along those lines.
Right, and the goal here is, I think we want to allow community contributors to have more ownership over these integrations. So
Yeah, I think I wanted to express I feel like my angle here is that we've had community pull requests come through, and I feel like we haven't been able to give the highest quality of reaction to those, because it's like, well, I don't have an instance of that right now to test against. How am I going to evaluate this? So just the question of like that evaluation is kind of hard. So hopefully like they would be able to like add a new test if needed, or we could have discussions based around those tests. That's the goal. That's where I'm coming from.
yeah, I understand. Okay, cool.
All right, if there's no other discussion topics, I think I actually have to resume my screen presenting real quick.
I put in one in for the end.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, I meant specifically around community integration testing for this one.
Sorry.
Yep, no worries. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing, which is a contribution/environment announcement by Mr. Jake.
Wouldn't really label it as an announcement, more just a call to action, or if anybody is hitting issues. I know we previously have talked about it before, but we have an open issue that people can use and mention and list anything that they want to see improvements wise for the development experience for AWX, especially if folks have never contributed to a project before or want to contribute or have contributed before and then found issues in ours. We're really trying to look to eliminate a lot of the like onboarding issues. We're trying to make it easier for folks to find a place to go and drop those. So if read through, make sure before you add anything to like add a comment there to make sure that the one you want isn't already listed. And then if you haven't, drop yours there, but also upvote the other ones as well. And then I think at some point we'll spawn new issues out of that to go and solve those. So yeah, super quick, just this small announcement. As I start working on some of the other HopNode stuff, as I find free time, I'm going to try to pick off some of this stuff early because I know I've had a lot of documentation issues. So,
Is this one of the pinned issues that we have as well?
I believe so.
So for pinned issues, if you just click on issues, we have these 3 pinned ones at the top. So one is for YouTube channel content request, and then here's the one that Jake is talking about now, improvements to AWX development experience. And then we always pin our community meeting agenda for upcoming meetings. And if quick plug, since we have a little bit of time, if you click into these, you can actually see the previous meetings. If you scroll down to the bottom here, you can go to the previous meetings, and once the links are made for the meeting recording, you can find them in these issues as well. All right, any questions on that announcement? Okay, moving on. Contributor thanks. We've done 2 releases of AWX and Operator since our last meeting, and these are all of the first-time contributors that we've seen. So thank you to all for helping out with that. Thank you to everyone who's attending today or watching this virtually later on. Hopefully we'll see you all again in about a month. And I think with that, we're pretty much all done with the content that we had, so we can open it up to general QA and discussion. Do we want to stop recording for general Q&A, or should we keep it going?
I'd say keep it open, but I'm biased.
Why don't we keep it open for a little bit, and then we'll close it down a little bit later on. And Sean, I see you have your hand raised.
Oh yeah, I added something on last night, and it was more of like a issue that I'd put up in a PR, for example. I was wondering about feedback because I think it's a good idea, but and I discussed it with Alan before, but was kind of trying to see about discussing it.
Which PR was it?
It's basic. The first one's the issue. The second
Okay.
one's the example. And I can share if you want to, but basically the idea is that coming from a config as code perspective, we've run into some roadblocks in terms of like defined state. So if you do not provide an option in the modules, it will sometimes like for things like credentials and labels and instance groups, it's empty. It'll say, I can't find any, and it returns all objects that you can find. Or like if you don't provide job slice count, it just leaves it as is. Someone's made a change in the GUI and you want to reset it back to default. So the idea is to take like what John did with the exists state, where it skips if it exists, is an enforced state, where if you choose enforced and you do not provide the option in the module, it will enforce the default API option. It's kind of like the overall idea. And this goes into examples of like other ways to work around it for some things with this whole omit thing. But if you go into the example in the code of the file exchange, I did 2 of the modules and added enforced alongside the exist. But if you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see where we're actually basically for associated fields, instance groups equals empty if it's none, and enforce defaults. For other things, you scroll back down some more. It does the same thing for basically every single one of these. Adds another else if, and there's more options where we start getting more explicit that aren't list items. These are all list items. It's all the same thing over and over again. Like default EE, max host 0, things like that. Schedule. If you go down to the basically bottom of this page, you can see a lot more. Like basically, if it's not none or enforced defaults. I meant scroll up all the way down, but this section was I was talking about. Or basically, if you do it this way, if it's not none or enforced default, it basically equals that default value. Versus before, it would just skip over these and not populate them at all. Be a lot of work to do it for every module, and I was basically electing myself to do that, so it wouldn't fall on the team. But then you'd have to maintain it for whenever you add new fields.
Yeah, so that's what I was just thinking, and I'm almost wondering if it would be better to grab the options page for the endpoint and then look at what the defaults are from the options page. That way we don't have to encode or make assumptions about stuff like this should be an empty list by default.
And I wasn't sure quite how to do that in terms of like doing it in the module where we're grabbing the options page. And so that's why I went this route.
You know what you could probably do is do like, so we have like these new fields and we start with an empty dict and then do like if enforced defaults and then call out to the
options thing.
Yeah, call out to the options page in there and pre-populate the dictionary with all of like the generic defaults, and then you could override anything that's coming in through the module on the
Yes.
dictionary. That might be a better way to handle that.
Definitely. If you show me the Python and grabbing that options page, I can probably then rework it. Or if you know like what I should be grabbing. But basically the idea is like either ways, I want to try and get this so it prevents code drift and things like that when people make changes. So if you're trying to do config as code, you can basically be like, it's set in stone if you're enforcing things and prevents that drift.
Yep.
But I thought I'd bring this up as like basically an improvement to as I go along. David.
I just had a thought that I was thinking about the way you guys talking about doing it. The one thing I was just thinking is what happens if you have a global variable for either like a default for EE at the organization level or even at the whole AWX level? Would that then get that value if you said enforce EE, or would it just pick the default?
At least according to what I've seen on the API side, if it's the global one doesn't come into play on the object like job template default. If you don't have anything set, it defaults to the project default. The project default doesn't have anything set. It's empty on the API side, but it defaults to the org default.
Yeah, so there's a hierarchy built in when it's looking for an execution environment.
But like for projects, execution environments, workflow nodes, generally the default is empty. An empty object saying that it's not specified, go with the what's up next in the hierarchy.
All right, I just want to make sure that it would end up getting the correct one, right? And that's all I was asking.
But no, I like your idea, John, of basically us grabbing it and then setting it instead of the new fields, or like as pre-populated new fields, and changing it from there. It makes it a lot cleaner than adding this is none and enforce default sort of thing, which is harder to maintain.
Is this a pattern that you found in other modules and other collections to have like an enforced state versus like doing some kind of like set all the defaults flag or something like that?
No, this is like, it's in every single one of our modules in various forms, but in terms of other collections, I've not seen it. But it's more of because of the nature of the API, we're trying to and how we're trying to do config as code, trying to prevent that drift and make it so if you want to reset an item back to the default, you then don't have to do like a state absent on every single item that isn't there. You want to have that code as your source of truth.
Yep. We'll definitely need some docs around what an enforced state means as well.
At least for me, that's why I called it enforced defaults. And kind of like that's what I put in the description for the information or the documentation, is that the idea is it's enforcing the defaults in the API. If we want to call it something else, we can, but that's kind of the idea. It's enforced defaults. The enforced state enforces default values of any option not provided. Here's at the top of this PR.
Any other thoughts on this or anything else anybody wants to bring up?
No, I just want to, I agree that it would be nice to see a more like programmatic way of doing the enforce defaults part. And it sounds like you guys have some good ideas about using the options page. So I'm in agreement. I think that would be useful for this. So.
Yep.
All right, if there's nothing else anyone wants to bring up on the recording, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Again, thank you to everybody who attended or who is watching later on. With that, I will say goodbye.